proposal that suggests that the fall of those exact two people propagated not just laterally to the rest of the population, but backwards in time, so that death before the fall was a retroactive punishment or something from the fall. It gets a little weird, but I guess I like the federal one, but I don't know. I mean, I've heard some people here saying, it could be that the fall sort of was a process, and I don't know. You know what? I don't know, but I know that when I read the Apostles' Creed of what I believe, I discover that it's probably not as important as a lot of people seem to think it is. You know what I'm saying? So.
Well, Steve, could you just say a little bit more about that? What don't you think is as important as the fall? Exactly
how original sin got to me. Where was Adam? How old was he? Where did he live? What did he do? What kind of fruit was it? I don't know. Somebody screwed up, and now I have to pay. That much is clear to me. There was a hand right there.
Yeah, I guess I just want to offer up a criticism and know your response to it. One of the things that I've been frustrated with evolution is generally like the presentation of it, in that many times they present stuff as evidence, and we find out that the picture being shown, we only have like a small piece. So, for example, like videos about the whales, some will say they, descended from wolves, and they make this elaborate picture from one small bone or one small hip bone, and it's like, okay, how do you go from this to all that? And that can be frustrating. I mean, even the picture of the chimpanzee gene, I don't think those were actual pictures. I think, were those actual pictures?
It's a diagram of actual pictures. That's what the chromosomes look like.
Okay,
Yep.
But is that the actual picture or an artist's rendition of it?
Of a chromosome?
Yeah.
It's a diagram. You can call it an artist's rendition if you want, but that's what the chromosomes look like.
Yeah, and so, I mean, just often pictures are presented in such a way that it's like, oh, it's very overwhelming, yet it seems more fragmented in reality.
Yeah, so I guess I'll address this by saying everyone's going to have to choose for themselves whether you think that scientists in general are extremely irresponsible in how they present data. It is true that sometimes, for example, Pachycetus, which was one of the first sort of ancient whale ancestors, was only a skull, and they had to guess what everything else was. That skull was really interesting. It showed sort of half whale, half sort of half in the water, half out of the water features. But that's why in 1994 people were so excited. Ambulocetus, that was almost a complete skeleton. Dorniodon, one of those big walking whales that I showed you that's at the University of Michigan, complete skeleton. I guess I'm just going to simply say I don't agree that scientists generally present extremely incomplete stories, and I certainly don't think that the genetic data has been cherry-picked. So having said that, perhaps the point is, well, gosh, isn't it true that scientists change their minds sometimes? Yep. That's what makes it fun to be a scientist. You don't have to, commit yourself to anything. But seriously, the problem with that argument, and I'm not saying you're making this argument at all, but the problem with saying, well, scientists don't tell the whole story, they change their minds all the time. I mean, remember Galileo, his paradigms changed. No. It's funny, I only hear that argument when we're talking about evolution. But I don't hear it when we're talking about developmental biology. Oh my gosh, you want to know how often we change our minds about that? Heck, people apparently change their minds about meteorite crater. But you're all pretty convinced it was a meteorite. I get frustrated, again, this gentleman did not say this, but I get frustrated with how the conversation is suddenly about the philosophy of science when we're talking about evolution, but not when we're talking about Notch and Delta, or meteorites, or waterfalls. So, yeah. No, I don't think scientists have cherry-picked the data, but I can't defend everything all at once. Larry.
Maybe make a variation on his comment and underline what I particularly liked about your talk. What I particularly like about it first is how much is predictive. Much of what you said wasn't predictive. It was the stuff that inspired Darwin.
Yep.
But other stuff, like the whales, was predicted. Before
That's
they had
right.
any really good transitions, they said there must be transitions.
Yeah, well, we're going to look for it.
And we're going to look for them, and we
Yeah.
kind of know where to find them, and they looked and they found them. It's that power of prediction that
Yeah,
I find really
that's huge.
compelling. Um,
That's one of those criteria you might use to choose a better explanation over the, say, alien spaceship explanation, right?
But if you ask, do you see presentations where evolution is appealed to, which doesn't come across at all compelling? I've seen many nature TV shows, you know, on whatever, PBS, where they show the behavior of the bird that has the bright red feathers, and they say evolution has given him bright red feathers so that he could mate and whatnot. And then the evolution of the bird that has very brown, you know, not distinct feathers. Well, evolution's given them that for a purpose. You realize that whatever color of feathers they have an explanation for it, and it's after the fact. And now, are these the actual explanations that apply to these birds? Maybe, maybe not. But it's really uncompelling when it's an after-the-fact just story.
Yep.
And you hear that, and when
Yep.
you hear that, you're not impressed.
And you know what I was trying not to do was give a talk that might be called, the name of this book here, by Jerry Coyne, Why Evolution is True. This actually is supposedly I haven't read it, supposedly a really good expose of the evidence that's explained by evolution. I think it's a very good book. Why Evolution is True, that's not the way I wanted us to talk tonight. So, was there a hand up here? No? Sir in the back.
If we accept the theory of evolution, which we must, and we follow the idea of its common ancestry, then isn't the result that salvation becomes anthropomorphic? That the first hominids came out of the trees and said, started walking on 2 feet and said, I need help. I need to be saved or something bigger than me. That's the problem I have.
I guess I don't quite follow how the reasoning went. So if we're going to confess that humans, through their folly, fell, I'm going to confess that and go ahead and confess ignorance about how exactly it unfolded. And then I'm going to understand salvation starting at the cross and radiating out from there, and not asking about how it started back in the past. All I can say is I don't follow the reasoning, and I don't accept that conclusion. I have little patience, actually, with these very systematic and scientific-sounding explanations for how original sin came to be, as though we have it explained. It doesn't actually make any sense. It's just you have to understand that you're born a sinner, and you don't get to, try an elixir that will cure you. I don't know. I hope it's obvious I'm not a theologian. Jim.
When you showed the bird foot and the bat foot, and you said, that it's basically the same structure. There's 2 possible explanations. One is that there's common ancestry, or 2, there's something about nature that just guides it in a certain direction.
I made a stronger suggestion than the second one, not just something that guides it, but anyway. A design constraint, because they're all the same.
Okay. I guess I'm not sure if I understand convergence all that well, but isn't convergence kind of making that same kind of argument?
Yeah, but it's a lot vaguer than that. So when you talk about convergence, you see, say, animals that have flipper-like things for moving through the water. That's a good example of convergence. Fins, things like that. We're talking about the basic underlying structure that doesn't have an obvious design function. In other words, 1 bone, 2 bones, little blobs, doesn't cry out to us that, oh, wow, I can't think of any other way to do it. And that's still what you need to get convergence. Flippers form because that's a great way to locomote through a liquid medium. 1 bone, 2 bones, little blobs does not cry out, that's a great way, that's the only way, that is the way to make a limb. And now, guys, I was serious when I said maybe that's a research project. Maybe someone should try to figure out why it's not going to work unless it's 1 bone, 2 bones, little blobs, digits. I don't think that's a good proposal, but I'm saying no one's offered that explanation.
So convergence doesn't get to that level of detail.
Well, it doesn't, but more than that, it's still connected to design.
Yeah.
the reason things converge, what he's talking about is there are really interesting examples in evolution of where evolution seems to have taken very different pathways and arrived at the same place. So flippers, interesting example. By the way, I mean, sort of whale flippers and fish fins, they're really interesting, but they're also different. Whales do this, and fish do that, and so there's, the bones are, it's different. When you look at the bones, you don't go, ha, same thing. No, they're different. But they converged on this interesting morphology that has an obvious functional design purpose. So what I'm saying is 1 bone, 2 bones, little blobs, fingers, the design purpose there is not evident. And when it becomes evident, maybe we'll say it is one of the, by far, the most extraordinary example of convergence. I would not bet on that horse.
Talk about flood theories a little bit and how you reconcile what the Bible says and what our ancestry has to say about that.
What the Bible says is that there was a flood. It's never been so obvious to me that it had to be covering the entire world, meaning the whole planet. I will simply say that those who study geology will tell you it is not evident from looking at geological evidence that there was a flood that covered the entire earth. If it happened, it didn't leave behind what you might call telltale evidence of its occurrence. And no matter what, it doesn't explain patterns in the fossil record. It fails to do that. Unless we need to introduce novel physical rules and constraints and phenomena as yet unimagined by humans. If you're asking me whether I believe there was a global flood, no, I don't. Other questions? John?
I know that intelligent design gets thrown out a lot and kind of it's kind of put down as a theory. But if we accept evolution as a tool of God for creation, isn't that essentially the same thing? God is making the evolutionary changes in us, or at least setting up a system that creates those changes. So he's essentially designing us intelligently. Is there a fundamental difference?
I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, so tonight wasn't really about intelligent design. Intelligent design is a bit amorphous. I mean, it's a sort of big thing that contains a few really interesting ideas, in my opinion. It also contains some really scurrilously, obnoxiously dishonest crap. And then it just contains, people talking about, well, so you're saying, if we think that God got what he wanted to make the people in this room, then in some sense he had to, design, right? I mean, and if we're talking like that, I don't actually know Christians, certainly not me, who have a problem with that kind of talk. So if we were ever going to talk about intelligent design, and we won't tonight, at least not while everyone's sitting, we can come up afterwards or whatever, you can come over and have a beer. So, never mind, you're not old enough. But seriously, so there's a lot to tease out there. I really like some of the things that intelligent design people talk about. They raise really interesting questions, some of which have been answered and they pretend they haven't. But if you're simply saying, Steve, don't we all agree God wanted this and he got what he wanted? How did he do that? Well, call it design. You haven't answered all the other questions like, how do the molecules move, whatever, but sure, why not? I propose that we let everyone leave now, and if you still want to come up and talk to me or tell me why I'm wrong, by all means come down and say hi, and I'll be here till, midnight or something like that. Have a good night. Find a safe place to stand.